Yeah, go to Congress. And you could do this in secret session. And Congress would have done anything. They would have passed a law saying the world is flat after 9/11 if the president asked for it. The second thing is, even if you thought that there was no time whatsoever, you'd say, Mr. President, if we do it as soon as we've done, we need to go to Congress and ask for ratification after the fact. They've got to ratify what we're doing is legal. We can't just throw the Constitution and shred it like we're now national security then. It trumps the Constitution of the United States. So there are ways in which you can approach this kind of crisis. Even defying the law, as long as you make certain that you're going to go back, have political ratification, you can explain what you've done without exposing sources and methods. And if you have to expose sources and methods in order to have legitimacy, that's what a republic requires. That's how you can do this.
It's clear why they didn't do that. They essentially say that when it comes to wiretapping, when it comes to torture, when it comes to various other things involving the president's power to make war, Congress simply cannot interfere. Therefore, the laws that seem to do that, like FISA, are inherently illegitimate.
President Obama has absolved those who did the torturing. They won't be prosecuted, he said. And Attorney General Holder said the other day, and I'm quoting, "It would be unfair to prosecute dedicated men and women working to protect America for conduct that was sanctioned in advance by the Justice Department." Is something a crime if the Justice Department has defined it as legal?
Well, Bill, there's been a long-standing rule in the laws that reasonable reliance upon legal advice is a defense. In fact, it was successfully invoked by Bernard Barker in the Watergate case. He's told, E. Howard Hunt told us we need to burglarize the psychiatrist's office of Daniel Ellsberg for national security purposes. So that is already into the law. That's entirely proper. But the people you go after, you mentioned, Mark, is at the very top. It's at Bush and the Cheney level. That's why Richard Nixon was under investigation for obstruction of justice. They didn't say just go after Haldeman and Ehrlichman and the Watergate burglars. They went after the President of the United States. That's why he needed a pardon. And that's what should happen here. The authorization came at the top. It's unfair to suggest these people who are being told by the President, who has access purportedly to all the national intelligence and security things in the world, do this. It's legal. And then you prosecute them, and the one who actually was responsible gets off scot-free? No, that's not the rule of law.
Is the Obama administration echoing, in effect, the defense of the German officials who, at the Nuremberg trial following World War II, said they were only following orders that had been from policy set by their higher-ups?
One of the problems with talking about Nuremberg is that one has to have a, if you order someone to say, look, there's a crowd of people over there, shoot them, here's the order, it's reasonable to assume that the person who has been given that order can look at this and say, well, that's murder. I shouldn't do it. You have a case in the torture debate that's somewhat different, where you had legal documents that said, you know what, torture is defined in this way. In fact, waterboarding doesn't fit under these strictures. Now, we can look at these documents and find them absurd. I do. But they were legal arguments. The CIA demanded them, and this goes back to the Church Commission.
Senator Church investigating
the CIA. Right. We're talking about Watergate again, of course, because this was in the aftermath of Watergate. They uncovered all kinds of assassination attempts, CIA wrongdoing, and in fact, from that point on, the president, who before would have basically said, I didn't know about that, henceforth, as a result of those hearings, the president had to sign a finding and say, you know what? Do this. I order you to do this. I'm the president. This is legal. We have that in this case, and the result is, of course, the CIA was very concerned to get their legal golden shield. That's why we have these documents. The result is that the entire government is implicated. I admire Bruce because he has the courage of his convictions. He's saying, prosecute the president, prosecute the vice president.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying you can pardon them.
Isn't the assumption of guilt if you pardon them?
Of course there is. And that prevents it from being a precedent that you can violate the law with impunity. That's why it's important to have a pardon rather than non-prosecution.
See, if you're going to have a pardon, I think the pardon is a very interesting idea. But if you're going to have a pardon, the only way to do it, it seems to me, is at the end of a long investigation, or at least a thorough investigation, that shows why they need to be pardoned.
And who should do the investigation?
It has to be an independent commission because, as you pointed out, and Mark, the Congress itself is implicated. Congress can't be trusted to investigate itself. Pelosi's not going to investigate herself. Jane Harman's not going to investigate herself. Harry Reid's not going to do that. So you need an independent commission. In the past, Bill, we've recruited people off the U.S. Supreme Court to head these kind of commissions. There's Earl Warren. You can have
Jackson from the Supreme Court presided over the Nuremberg trial.
Yes, so those would be candidates to undertake this kind of commission. But the critical thing is that the commission has to have access, as Mark said, to all classified information, and they have to have authority to declassify it. Because what made the Church Committee successful, to the extent it was like Watergate, it was public. You can have some secret sessions, but it's an educational mission that Mark's talking about that's got to be done. This can't be done in secrecy.
You know, during the Vietnam War, the United States sponsored, trained, and funded Operation Phoenix, which approved our allies in South Vietnam practicing torture, taking Viet Cong suspects and torturing them. North Vietnamese soldiers, insurgents. By the CIA's own account, over 20,000 suspected insurgents were killed or tortured to death with our approval. We have also learned in all these hearings you've been talking about how the U.S. trained torturers in Central America, let death squads operate in Central America. We now think that there's torture going on by our allies in Iraq. So here we are talking about maybe 28 men after 9/11 who were tortured, and talking about 3 of them who were waterboarded a number of times. Why all the tumult now?
It's a matter of proximity to the evil. If you're doing it directly, it's different than if you're encouraging somebody else to do it. And one of the things that your question brings out as well is, you know, we had the Chief of Staff to Colin Powell, Lawrence Wilkerson, testify just last year. There have been 108 detainees who died in U.S. custody, and 25, he says, have been found by our own internal investigation to be victims of murder. And we just sort of shrug our shoulders. It shows why do we do it? It's Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 8, and I encourage all your readers to read Federalist 8, said, at a time of crisis and war, even democracies will yield civil liberties and freedom because they'll be fearful, and that the leaders have to try to prevent that. And that's what's going on here. Remember the same phenomenon in World War II. 120,000 Japanese Americans. We've got to put them in concentration camps. Even though 5 months after Pearl Harbor, no evidence of espionage, no evidence of sabotage, they were volunteering out of the concentration camps to go fly and got bemedaled for their bravery. And yet we did it. And it took 30 years later before he said, this got it wrong. This is happening again. The leaders are there to try to prevent us from succumbing to our basest instincts from fear.
There's no question that there have been many times in American history when the United States is attacked, when it responds by breaking its own laws. You could cite the Palmer raids, Korematsu, as you just did, the McCarthy period. You can cite a number of examples. But you ask why this is different. And I'll tell you what it seems to me is dramatically different. This was made legal within the American government. I say made legal with quotes. This was officially done. This was ordered by the President. The Department of Justice made memos saying you can do this. The principals, Attorney General, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, sat in meetings and talked about interrogations that were plainly illegal according to our laws and according to treaties we have signed. All of it is now laid out before the public. And finally, if you look at Fox News, if you look at discussions of this, usually on the conservative side, not always, but usually on the conservative side, you find a strong attempt basically to say, not only should this stuff have been done, but we should not handcuff ourselves, we should keep doing it. So we're talking about not simply what happened before, we're talking about the politics of now. And that's why it's important.
Are we in danger of letting this preoccupation with what is over and happened 5 years ago distract us from coping with the world?
No. Indeed, our greatest character as a nation comes from putting rule of law and how we behave towards others as more important than what the GNP is. Once we decide it's more important to prevent a layoff in some place as opposed to following the rule of law, then we've lost our soul as the United States of America. Then we're the Roman Empire. And that's not what the Founding Fathers fought for. And moreover, the Nixon period shows that you can chew gum and walk at the same time. There, you may recall, in the middle of impeachment, we had the Yom Kippur War, we had crisis with the Soviet Union, putting on high alert, all those sorts of things. The impeachment process went on. You can pass laws as well. There's no reason why that the focus on prosecution or pardons and confronting this directly disables us from addressing these other issues. And if it does, that's the price you pay for liberty in a republic.
And one should add, by the way, that this is vitally important not only because of what happened before, but because of what's going to happen after another attack. And we have to assume there will be another attack. And if the argument that torture is absolutely crucial to protect the country is accepted by the population, then in the wake of another attack, the politics, I think, are very likely to be extremely poisonous. blaming the current administration because it didn't torture and thus left the country vulnerable. So we're talking about not simply the Bush administration, we're talking about who we are, what we do in the world, how we fight this war, and what will happen in the wake of another attack that's very likely to come.
This has been very informative. Bruce Fein, Mark Danner, thank you for joining me on The Journal.
Thank you, Bill.
You.